Hello and welcome to part 4 of The Root of Autism. Today we're talking about the chemical effect, and this is part 4. So for part 1, we talked about the sensory overload, and we broke down what how the senses process information. In part 2, we talked about oversensories and common sensory sensitivities that are often problematic for people with autism. And in part 3, we talked about the effects of socialization and why socialization is hard for people with autism. If you missed any of those parts, go back and watch those. But today is part 4, and we're talking about the chemical effect. And I'm going to talk to you today about how I discovered the root of autism. Like, Teray, how did you even figure this out? Like, why does this even, how did you get your son from where he was to where he is? Because whenever my son was little, he wasn't as high functioning as he is now. How did we go from there to here? So let me tell you a story. Back in 2005, I worked as the assistant director of outreach at the University of Pittsburgh Center for Environmental Oncology at the Cancer Institute of the Center for Environmental Oncology. It's a long name. Okay. And my job was to teach on cancer risks. Stay with me. It sounds unrelated, but bear with me. And my job was to go out into the community and teach on cancer risks. Because especially back then, when people would be diagnosed with cancer, they would be like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. What caused this? And doctors would say, we don't know what causes cancer, but we need to treat it. And my department at the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute would say, yes, we do know what causes cancer. Let us teach you what the cancer risks are. Okay? Now, of course, our department was the first of its kind and very much before our time, because even whenever we would go into the community and teach on cancer risk, people were completely oblivious. Now everybody's talking about the very thing that I was teaching about back in 2005. But not only would I do that, but our department was actually, our office was in a hospital in Pittsburgh, not on the campus, but in a hospital. And we were responsible for training doctors, actual medical physicians, working with scientists and PhDs, okay? My boss was an epidemiologist who studied this. So she headed our department. Her name was Deborah Davis, and she wrote a couple of books, and this is one of the books that she wrote. I'm highlighting this book because I helped her with this book, and my name is in this book. So I'm proud of this. And if you look in this book on page 483, you'll see my name in the acknowledgement section. Okay. So, and it's called The Secret History of the War on Cancer by Deborah Davis. Okay. And so, like, she has dedicated her life to cancer research. And so, in addition to that, we would make an attempt to, do talks and to do lunch and learns for doctors. And we did all this stuff. And to teach people about lifestyles and to eliminate toxins that were cancer causing. Okay. So at the time, my kids were little, and I made lifestyle changes because I believed in what I was teaching. I wasn't just teaching it. I actually was walking the walk, okay, walking the talk. And what I noticed whenever I started eliminating toxins are substances that are poisonous to humans, is that my son's behavior started changing, the one that has autism. Yeah, they're cancer risks. They're toxins. There are certain chemicals in the environment that cause cancer. We know this. But what I recognized is that these chemical exposures to his brain was also doing something. Because you have to understand, he also is very hypersensitive. to a lot of stimuli, even chemicals. And whenever I eliminated certain toxins, I noticed that it made a difference in his behavior. The definition of toxin is a substance that is poisonous to human. My definition of a toxin is any foreign substance that enters into the body that causes body disruption. Definition of disruption: a disturbance or a problem which interrupts an activity, event, or process. But my definition of disruption is a profound break in normal patterns that bring about significant change. See the difference? So to me, when my son, who has autism, was exposed to these toxins, there was a disturbance, a profound break in his normal patterns that brought about a significant change. Now, my other son didn't have autism. I didn't want him exposed to this either, because these substances, these chemicals could cause cancer, right? But for my son with autism, not only was he exposed to these potentially cancer-causing chemicals, but these chemicals could possibly alter his behavior. But not just that. I noticed that what I knew as a former daycare director, but also I have a background in child development, is that the brain of a child is still developing. Why do I want my child's brain exposed to toxins? What people don't realize also is that when we are exposed to small amounts of toxins, a little bit at a time, it may or may not cause too much of a disruption in our body, which is why the government allows it in our environment. The problem is a term that we used to use at the Cancer Institute called body burden, which is a collection of those toxins in our bodies. So we, people, are exposed to toxins all day, every day, and all night. All the time. And chemical exposure to those of us who can, for lack of a better term, like we're used to it, our bodies can process it, that's one thing. But for a child with autism, who has extreme sensitivities, and their brain is still developing, it's just not a good idea. It's affecting their developing brain. When I was at the Cancer Institute, I used to work on projects. I worked with a number of departments. I worked with the Graduate School of Public Health at Pitt. My job also was to create relationships and collaborations with external organizations like the CDC and, like Whole Foods and other, organizations that had similar missions as we did. But one of the projects that I did was I had to work with the doctors and scientists in our organization to create this. This is a project, a pamphlet that we created. This is one of many projects I worked on. It's called The Environmental Risks of Breast Cancer in African American Women. And that is me on the front. My boss wanted to use an African American woman on the front instead of going to go get a model. She was like, why don't we just use you? Let's just put your face on the front. It's hilarious. So, and this was just one of the things, because I went to a number of conferences and she wanted us to, pass out flyers, and there I am again on the front, or on the inside. And it just talks about the statistics and the information regarding different products. The reason why I'm showing you this is because I just saw recently in the news about, hair care products and the synthetic hair that black women, that the chemical, um, heavily chemicals being in synthetic hair with black women's hair. But these are some of the resources that we also used whenever we were at the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute. So these are the things that we worked with. These are these are some. This is some of the information that we used. Some of the information that I lived by, that I changed my lifestyle. But over time, I started to see a change in my son. And it took a while for me to say, you know what? His exposure to chemicals changed. And even now in this climate, the season that we're in our country, and they can't figure out what causes autism or what's even affecting people with autism. I figured it out a long time ago. I'm not saying that what causes autism or whatever, that's the debate for them, the scientists, the doctors to figure out. I'm not a scientist, but I've worked in this field with scientists and doctors. When you eliminate toxins and chemicals from your child's exposure, it makes a difference. Again, we're not trying to cure them, but we also know that trying to change their behavior without knowing the root of what's behind the behavior isn't really going to work. What if eliminating 80-90% of the toxins and the chemicals that's in their environment will help them to be able to regulate their brain to the point where they can have a better chance of being able to have more control over their brain and therefore having more control over their behaviors. Because whenever they seem out of control in their brain, they can't make sense of things, they're miserable. We want to put them into a place of control for their own selves so that they can get to the point where they can live the life that they want. Where are these chemicals coming from? They're in some not so obvious places. I'm going to teach you what I used to teach, what I got paid at the University of Pittsburgh. I got paid good money at the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute to teach on these cancer risks and these chemicals and these toxins in the environment that I still follow now. Tomorrow, I'm going to do a deep dive on these chemicals in the environment, what we should look for, how to make simple. It's not hard. It's not a lot. You can do step-by-step changes in your environment. You don't have to change every single thing. It doesn't have to cost $1 million. It won't take forever. There are some things that you can start with today to make some changes to eliminate toxins in your environment that will make a difference, okay, in the lives of your child, your family, your environment, okay? So that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. I'm going to be breaking down what some of these culprits are, letting you know what some of these easy changes are. And tomorrow is part 5, and it's going to be called Minimizing the Chemical Burden. Okay? I hope this helps. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.